Off we go. So, what is this book about? Why did you write this book, and what is it about?
I wrote the book because a friend of mine, John Gisongo, who was the anti-corruption czar for the Kenyan government, turned up on my doorstep, having fled into exile very, very suddenly after having discovered a corruption scandal. So there was a fascinating story involving someone who I knew, who trusted me, who I'd known for a long time, why he'd fled, what he discovered, what he was going to do about what he now knew. But it was a way for me, his story was just a way of talking about bigger themes that had always obsessed me about Kenya and about Africa generally. The problem of corruption, where it comes from, why it's so hard to eradicate, and also the basis for corruption, which it seemed to me was about ethnic solidarity, a community's methods of surviving in states where their best interests were not being catered for. So it was a way of touching on these really strong fundamental themes through the story of one man.
Do you think corruption is a fundamental obstacle to African development, or it is just an externality of a process of development itself?
Firstly, every society has a level of corruption. It's not an African thing. It's not unique to Africa. Mm-hmm. I think what is certainly unique to Africa, though, is the level to which corruption has held countries back and leached on the economies of countries that really didn't have enough wealth to spare. So I think it is a massive issue. It's an expression of poor government, of cynical leadership, and often it isn't taken seriously enough by the people who are interacting with African governments. Right. They tend to think it's a sort of unsavoury, unsightly, but a small thing. And if often when you look closely at an aid program, a project, and see how much has been stolen, often at very high levels of government, it's more than just a small thing. It can really undermine the entire validity of the program.
So you think corruption is somehow imbricated with aid programs? There is no possibility to, or no effort being made to detach them?
I think there's a tendency for aid to be stolen because people are very aware that it's not taxpayers' money. I think governments, by their very nature, are going to be more careful of the way taxpayers' money is spent because they know they account to the voters and the voters' mind and will watch where that money goes. As soon as you receive money from a Western donor who is clearly not that concerned in how it is spent, and that's often the message that comes across, then an African government will think, well, this is sort of free money, it's extra, it's money that we don't really need, and therefore nobody's going to notice if it goes missing. So I think by its very nature, aid often is corruptible.
Right. You have said this morning, at some point you talk about how through the experience of this book you saw how tribalism in Kenya was slowly transforming into a society of classes where people were being aware that they had problems beyond the clusters where they wanted, where others were putting them in. No? To what extent do you think Arab democratic revolutions are going to travel south in the coming years, and how long this is going to take? Or you think that this has nothing to do?
No, I think all the reasons that sent young people out, mostly men, young men out onto the squares in Egypt and Tunisia and Libya, all of those frustrations are further south in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. I think it will take a while before they reach the same sort of level of expression because of this sense of ethnic difference. The divide and rule game has been played very successfully by politicians. What you saw in Kenya was class consciousness kind of emerging in the slums, and then it was sort of suddenly ethnic identity became the issue in the last elections, and it didn't matter so much that which class you belonged to, it was just which ethnic community you belonged to. So these things shift all the time, and I think that's true of a lot of African countries. that there is still such a strong sense of ethnic solidarity that it prevents a sort of mass movement forming. So I would say, I mean, my guess would be another 10 years before you see something like what we saw in North Africa happening in sub-Saharan Africa.
Right.
But maybe it would be 5 years. I mean, it might happen a lot faster. Things are moving so fast in Africa.